to the world. Subscribe now to the Hot 97 YouTube channel. It's Ebro in the Morning with Laura Stiles and Rosenberg.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's Ebro in the Morning. Laura Stiles, Rosenberg, our peoples. Jemele Hill of Unbothered on Spotify. A Spotify original is joining us today. Good morning, Jemele. How are you?
Good morning. Good to be with you all.
So I want to, I've known you for many, many years. I want to first formally say congratulations on everything that's going, including in your personal life, the marriage and all of that beautiful stuff, and just all of the great work you continue to do. Right now, I want to get right to what's happening in society and sports. You were the figure when it came to sports and politics and ESPN trying to figure out how people on air should deal with it. The president had some words for you. That's a few years in the past now, but we're still here. We're still in this moment in history where the current occupant of the White House has things to say about people in the media. Athletes are still kneeling. And sports is trying to figure out how to play sports. Some people trying to figure out how to not get involved in politics, but a lot of people are like, look, politics is a part of it, and we're going to use our platform. I would love to hear from you right now, your view on all of it and how things have worked out.
Well, the people who always thought that somehow sports was happening in one place and the world was happening in somewhere else, we're just kind of being very intellectually dishonest. These issues, politics, race, gender, culture, they have always collided in sports from the beginning of time. And I think what happened was when athletes or when this society started to get a little more divisive, a little more polarizing, a lot of people looked at sports as an entertainment option only, as being, something they wanted to use to get away from the real world, as if the people that play sports and the things that impact sports are not impacted by the real world. I mean, we see that very clearly with the pandemic. We have a sports world that's trying to get back to quote unquote normal when society can't get there. So why would we think that sports would be somehow able to solve a problem that in America we're having a very difficult time grappling with? And I know these are well-conditioned athletes who have a certain amount of privilege, who have the access to the best of everything. And you see what's happening in baseball is that at the end of the day, probably the best option would have been not to play for everybody. People don't want to hear that. Even for our society, had we just taken a hardcore shutdown for more months and weeks than we did, we might have had some kind of handle on this. But unfortunately, we're just not that disciplined. We have a real lack of leadership. The occupant has a lot to do with this. And now we have a pandemic that's clearly out of control, and the rest of the world doesn't want to play with us. But the good side, and I hesitate to use the word good side of this, is that this sit down, everything's slowing down, I think has forced a lot of athletes to reevaluate a lot of things. And with what happened to George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, seeing all these incidents, why everything else was at a standstill, I think it really invigorated a lot of them. And now they understand that the toothpaste can't be put back into the tube. We can't go back to this false idea of sticking to sports. And they have, they're positioned differently. They have, great platforms. A lot of them now feel empowered, especially because there's a lot of more pressure on leagues and organizations to show that they have some kind of commitment to social justice. So it's been quite a turnaround to see. 4 or 5 years ago, Black Lives Matter, or even paying any sort of attention to how police brutality was impacting marginalized people was kind of a cuss word, and it was too uncomfortable to ever discuss. And now you have Roger Goodell talking about Black Lives Matter. So it's amazing how when public support gets behind something, when the public opinion shifts and something looks as if it's more acceptable among a certain group, it's amazing how many people jump on board. It's like with history, we never learn. We saw this, we've literally seen some version of this every few years or every decade or every mass movement. Martin Luther King went from being the most hated man in America to, after, of course, he was assassinated, being one of the most beloved Americans of all time. We always come to this crossroads in this moment where we get to decide what side of history we need to be on. And I think history has shown us the majority of us usually pick the wrong side. And so now everybody's trying to have a do-over. I'm trying not to be bitter about it and just accept that this will hopefully advance a conversation forward. But there's a part of me that remains bitter and frustrated.
The wrong side is usually the comfortable side.
Correct.
Well, and you said something there that is a perfect transition to what I wanted to ask you. So now that Roger Goodell is using Black Lives Matter, now that Black Lives Matter is written on the mound at every baseball stadium and on the court at every basketball game, what does that mean? You know, in terms of, does it still mean anything for people to say Black Lives Matter? And by the same token, how do you view kneeling in that same lens when now way more people are kneeling? What do you still see as being impactful and actually forcing a conversation?
So with Roger Goodell, his statement, while I'm sure the players were to some degree comforted, particularly after he sold them out, when they cowardly bowed to Donald Trump a few years ago. I'm sure that for them, it probably was a little bit of a relief, and it gave them some measure of support, knowing that as they choose to speak out about these issues, that there won't be maybe nearly as much pushback as it was before. But ultimately, big picture, 10,000-foot view or 60,000-foot view, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything because Roger Goodell, as I have had to constantly remind people, he works for the owners. He is not the NFL owners. You haven't heard much from them, have you? Right? And that is what really matters. What also matters is the systemic racism inside the NFL that has not been properly addressed ever. You have 3 black head coaches,
Bear
2 black
agrees with
general
you.
managers.
Rosenberg's dog agrees with you.
Oh, my God,
yes,
fully.
because they know, look, your dog knows the truth, all right? 2 black general managers. They've never had a black majority owner in the NFL. That's the systemic racism they have to deal with in their own league. That was so bad that prior to the pandemic, they actually were entertaining bribing NFL teams to give black people a chance when it came to coaching positions. That's how bad that league is. So when you say, what does it mean? I'm like, well, ultimately, until you have, 32 NFL owners who actually are on board with changing that, then you really have nothing. And I haven't heard any of them speak to the social justice movement that's happening now. I don't think Colin Kaepernick is ever going to play in the NFL again, so they're not going to fix that part. So what really are they fixing? Nothing. They're just saying, Roger Goodell's just saying a statement so that the knives won't be further sharpened on this league and there won't be more spotlight on just how inadequate and incompetent they've been in this area. So it's hard for me to trust it. And even with Major League Baseball, though, I've been shocked, frankly. I mean, you mentioned Black Lives Matter, the phrase being everywhere in baseball. The fact that the Red Sox have this at Fenway is just like, wait, what? What world am I living in? However, I pay very close attention to the statements being released and what people are saying. And it was one particularly empty statement that said, this is not a political statement. This is not a social statement. This is bringing humanity together. What are you talking about? Unless you can name it, what are you talking about? And so I'm looking for the people who are willing to get into the muddy stuff, the tough stuff, the uncomfortable stuff. I'm looking for some Ben & Jerry's out there. Ben & Jerry's put out the best corporate statement that I saw of anybody, right? Where they named it, they said what it was, here it is, deal with it. That's what I'm looking for.
Did you
know
think
what I'm saying?
What'd you think of the Red Sox statement, actually, when they went into the Mookie Betts thing and they talked about the racism among their own fan base?
So I actually thought that was a huge step forward because, everybody knows what that negative history has been. And even, with their fans. And I've had friends of mine who are in sports who have had some horrible experiences. And, nothing is more, a friend of mine, my dear friend, Michael Smith, my former co-host, he used to say this all the time. Nothing is more racist than when Boston tries to defend itself from racism. It's true,
So true.
because their defense, it's so true because their defense is always, well, we're racist, but we're not as racist as Alabama. It's like, that's your go-to? Like, stop it. Like, on a scale of racism, like, we ain't that bad, but we bad. It's just like, all right, stop it. Okay, I got you. So, but it was important that this was a history that they have always tried to tiptoe around. They've never acknowledged, or they've acknowledged it in small ways at certain points, but to actually kind of dive in there, I was actually really encouraged by what they did. But there's a lot of other organizations, hello, Washington football team, I'm looking at you, that are not really willing to really dig in there and unpack the layers of racism and misogyny and things that have been issues in our broader society that have certainly been issues in these organizations.
Jemele, you were in the headlines because you were announced as the producer behind the new Colin Kaepernick project, working with Disney. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening with that?
Well, we are still in the infancy stages, but the way it all went down was really, was really something that I still can't believe, because this was not something that was on the vision board. This was not something I didn't even think was possible. I hadn't thought of as much as a month ago. Like, that's how quickly this all happened. And it started from a really good place. I mean, Colin called me and he wanted to talk about this alliance, and mostly he wanted my input. And I was really humbled, because while I've gotten to know Colin, I would never misportray our relationship as being super close or anything like that. We certainly have respect for each other. Our collective spaces wound up colliding into one another because of what I said about the president. Obviously, him being attacked by pretty much everybody.
You guys are in the same chapter in history.
Pretty much. I mean, we just sort of have become intertwined. See, you said what I wanted to say, only smarter Rosenberg. That's what they pay you the big bucks. Right. So we've been intertwined. And so because of that, there's been a lot of mutual respect that has developed without us having to have much conversation about it. And I was really surprised when he called me, because he wanted my thoughts on Disney and ESPN. And what really meant a lot to me was, and he was very serious about this, is that he was willing to not do this deal if he felt as if this was somehow undermining me. And that was very surprising to me, because Colin Kaepernick doesn't owe me that. I left ESPN on amicable terms. I know people hear that word and they say, was it really amicable? I mean, yes, there's some things I am bitter about, but generally speaking, I had a good relationship with a lot of people in there, and it was my decision to leave. And I had multiple years left on my contract. So he wanted to know the autopsy of what happened, so that if he decided to seriously consider getting into business with them, that he wasn't going to be getting into business with people who have a reputation for undermining people of color, Black women. And he didn't want to do anything to hurt the progress of Black people. When we had those conversations, I was fair, but I was honest. And while, ESPN is not unlike a lot of corporations that struggle when it comes to diversity, or I hate to use the blanket term of diversity, they struggle with amplifying Black voices, both on camera and behind the scenes, especially behind the scenes. They have struggled with amplifying and promoting and elevating Black leadership. They are not alone in this, and that's not to absolve them, but it's a reality that's in corporate America. And the reason why I told him I was a real proponent of him doing this, and I know that might surprise some people given my history, I guess, with ESPN, is because I felt like he had a very unique opportunity to sort of elevate and amplify and really encourage a lot of people there that need that, and to put forth some really dynamic programming and to do something from a culture standpoint that I don't think has been done at ESPN. It was, to me, just a real obvious win for him. And when it comes to his documentary, I mean, we've seen what ESPN has been able to do in this space, whether it be OJ or a number of the stories that they've been able to tell. And there's no better place than that. And there was obviously a reckoning, I think, happening inside of ESPN where they have doubled down on their commitment to the type of content that I think Colin wants to produce. So I thought it made a lot of sense. And through the course of our conversations is when he brought up the idea of me coming on board as a key producer for him. And I jumped at the opportunity because I felt like that his story has been so distorted since he took that knee, and there's been a lot of false information, and we all had to watch in real time as very false, untrue, and polarizing and hateful narratives were shaped around him. And this is an opportunity to get that right, and so that people know what really happened and have an idea of the sacrifice that he made. And I've always looked at journalism as an opportunity to chronicle history for future generations so they know and can put things into context. And I looked at this as probably the most exhilarating and biggest challenge of my career.
That's dope. And you said earlier in our conversation you don't think he'll play in the NFL again.
I don't. And
you're basing that on him?
No, I do not base that on him. Colin's ready, and he's been ready for some time. I base that purely on the cowardice of NFL owners. And not just the cowardice. Frankly, I think part of it is also bitterness, too, is everything when Colin took a knee, when the president started taking shots at players and started using the NFL to gain political talking points, I think there are a lot of owners that resented the fact that Colin had put them in the crosshairs of the White House in that way, and they're not over that bitterness. And
they couldn't control him. They couldn't shut him down. They couldn't stop his narrative. They couldn't stop. Even to this day, they haven't been able to control this story the way billionaire elite white supremacists like to control history. No,
they can't. And we have to, I've said this many times, and it still rings true. If Colin Kaepernick had beat a woman, he'd be back in the NFL, because committing domestic violence is a correctable behavior. At least that's a narrative they can push to fans and to media and say, oh, he doesn't do that anymore. Or, right. That was in the past. He's reformed. What Colin Kaepernick thinks about white supremacy, racial oppression, the president, they can't put that toothpaste back in the tube. They can't say all of a sudden he doesn't care about these issues. And to your point, Ebro, he's become such an iconic person that they will never be able to control him. He will be, in many aspects, bigger than them. And because of that, that's not something they want in their locker room, because it's not just about Colin's presence. It's also about his influence on other guys. And I don't think that they want him having that kind of influence in the NFL.
You wrote an amazing piece, following up the anti-Semitic explosion that took place because of Desean Jackson, and then Steven Jackson, and the subsequent lack of understanding and ignorance around what is harmful to people of Jewish descent, and people often in our own community, the black community, not understanding and that harm. I would love to hear, because Rosenberg and I obviously covered a lot. Me being of both black and Jewish descent, we covered a lot because it all stems back to white supremacy and elites and billionaires around the globe. And as black people are constantly, at least in my life, have been on a mission, my father, my uncles, trying to find the truth about who black people are and where we come from and what the stories are, and getting to that. We often get into a space of pointing fingers at other groups for withholding information or changing information. I would love for you to impart on the audience that didn't see your piece. I think it was in The Atlantic.
Correct.
About your kind of own coming to deal with understanding Hitler and anti-Semitism and things that you've learned.
So what happened with me, my Hitler moment, as unfortunately I have to say, was in 2008 when I was working at ESPN, and I was covering the Lakers-Celtics finals. And, I was writing a column just about how the Celtics had become very beloved really, especially in black culture, because of Kevin Garnett and Rondo and Ray Allen and Paul Pierce, because clearly they had this kind of unapologetically black team. And when I was growing up, the Celtics were a cuss word. I'm from Detroit. I hated them. I hated Larry Bird. I hated Danny Ainge. I hated all of them. And so, it's a different relationship that I have with the Celtics and what we saw in present day. So it was meant to be kind of a whimsical, funny column. And I had a line in the column that said, rooting for the Celtics is like saying Hitler is a victim. Clearly inappropriate, clearly very insensitive. And yes, it was published and it created a furor, and I was suspended, deserved that suspension. And it taught me a lot of different lessons. I was very embarrassed by it, still am. I think it's probably the most professionally embarrassing thing I've done in my career. And what came out of that for me is understanding that because of culturally, I think the things that I had been told, the things I saw happen around in my community, the things I think that happened in the wider Black community, there was a level of anti-Semitism that's kind of tolerated, if not encouraged, in our community. And this is not to say that Black people have cornered the market on anti-Semitism. That's clearly not true. Okay. So I don't want people to mistake that I'm saying Black people are especially worse when it comes to anti-Semitic viewpoints and language and that sort of thing. But there is an undercurrent that is acceptable. And I think a lot of it comes from the fact that we start playing the oppression Olympics with everybody, meaning that we have been through hundreds of years of oppression. Mm-hmm. We're still under oppressive forces. White supremacy is real. That being said, you cannot use that as a way to excuse marginalization of other marginalized groups, or for that matter, as I found, that there's a lot of historically inaccurate information that is floating around our community about Jewish people that begins to be used as gospel and as talking points, where people think they're saying something that's supposed to uplift us, but it's usually at the harm of this community, especially as you mentioned, Ebro, when we start talking about who lays claim to being the first Hebrew and all that. Like when we start getting to those areas, things get real wild, right? And most of us, if we're being completely honest, do not have the historical context or knowledge to engage thoughtfully in those discussions. We don't. Most of us don't even understand Israel and Palestine. We do not. So to then take memes and snippets and bits of information that are a lot of times anti-Semitic and try to make a larger point, we just getting ourselves in a lot of trouble for no reason. Because I'm sure when Desean Jackson posted that fake quote, now why he thought posting anything from Hitler would ever be a starting point of any conversation, I don't know. But I'm sure in his mind, he actually thought he was doing something good, because there was in his mind.
Because he was trying to educate and try to understand origins of Black people.
Correct. And he was trying to understand those origins to say that, hey, we're a race that that has self-worth. We're deserving of, we're deserving of our wildest dreams and all this. And even by his praise of Farrakhan, he was doing this, I think in his mind, and I haven't talked to him, but I can just see his wheels turning at him thinking he's doing something educational, uplifting, and encouraging, right? And I don't know if you read the quote or how much he knew about Hitler in general, but there was a clear lack of ignorance. And, it's pervasive in hip hop lyrics of talking about Jew money and all this, like it's everywhere. That's something that has been indoctrinated. And we don't think these stereotypes are harmful because enough of us don't know the history, and that's the reason.
Well, and I think specifically people don't understand that the Hitler movement, the Nazi movement, was tied to these stereotypes, but it was also tied to white supremacy, which is the one thing that I believe Black folks, we often look past, is that all of this global domination, whether it be from Christian groups, Catholic groups, Jewish groups, Muslim groups, has all been tied back to white supremacy and elites trying to keep control, like we just talked about with the NFL owners and Colin Kaepernick, trying to keep control of history and control the narrative. So you can't just tie the most evil behavior of people who represent a group to an entire group and think that you've figured out history. Because that's
Correct.
the one thing that people always do.
And they tell stories that are 5,000 years old to like we're understanding a narrative, because like, well, when you go to the Caucasus Mountains, I'm like, how many thousands of years ago are we talking about? And then like, and Jemele, I imagine for, I think all of us have had a really common experience, which is that it's strange that besides all the anti-Semitism and then racism in the Jewish community, because it goes both ways, in our lives, there's just so much positive personal interaction between black people and Jews. Like it's I mean, maybe it's a hip hop thing, but I'm sure you saw it in the sports world as well. It just seems like it's so common, and that kind of seems to get thrown by the wayside, and we go to this narrative instead, which is difficult to see.
So it's great that we're having this conversation, because very recently I was on a panel with a Jewish organization, UGA, and one of the things that we discussed was about how, even though the Anti-Defamation League, they found that there was a level of anti-Semitism, not violent, in the Black community that was a little bit higher than some other groups based off a survey that they did. What they also noted, that most of it came from ignorance, honestly, that it wasn't something that was hateful or spiteful. It just, a lot of people just didn't know. I mean, what Ebro just said is really important, is not understanding the chain link with white supremacy, is that unless you white and Aryan and do understand what Aryan means, you ain't in the club. Okay. So
we're all left out of the same golf course. All right.
We all left out. Right. Exactly. You all left out. And a lot of these white supremacy movements, white nationalists, they're targeting, and as we've seen from the violence that has been experienced in this country by the Jewish community recently, very recently, that they're a targeted group because this, goes back years and years and years, and part of because of that stereotype about Jewish people scheming and being conniving and basking, and collaborating together to eliminate them. Like it's real deep stuff, and so we have to understand as Black people that, look, they come for one of us, they coming for all of us. And the sooner we understand that picture, then we can get out of this idea of playing the oppression Olympics. And that's not to say that what we've been through shouldn't be centered. It is to say that it's a whole piece of this that we need to understand as we go forth and try to advance racial progress.
And how did the reaction go, Jemele? Because your piece was amazing. It was touching for people like me. I know a lot of my family, everyone read it, was so super happy that you wrote it. And I reached out to you and told you it was beautiful. But I know on the flip side, when you stand up in that spot, now it looks like you're coming down on the Black athletes who said these things. So how did that play out for you?
It's one of the more uncomfortable columns I've definitely had to write, not because I have a problem expressing those beliefs or have a problem standing in allyship with the Jewish community, who, by the way, the outpouring that I received from the Jewish community was really heartwarming and very heartfelt. I had conversations with people that I did not expect. One of them, Bob Kraft, called me. That one really surprised me, because I have been a staunch critic of Bob Kraft because of his relationship with Donald Trump and because he gave money to his inauguration. And we had a very enlightening and good talk, I would say, where we both were able to understand each other's perspective. And I think I found out some things about him, he found out some things about me. And so that part of any column you write, whenever you have those conversations, not just because Bob Kraft owns the Patriots, but just people that I think may have thought a certain thing about you, but then realized you were not limited to that one thing they thought about you, it always is a treat. However, that being said, because of it never feels good, even if it's deserved, to criticize people in your own community. And I'm not just talking about Desean Jackson. I mean, Steven Jackson is somebody I consider a friend. I love him dearly. He's a great guy. I think he was wrong on this. The way that he handled it, the way he reacted and responded to it. I think Desean Jackson was wrong But I think in both of them, there is some hope there and some education that I think will happen. And it is happening with Desean Jackson, who is making very earnest steps so that he does not repeat this mistake again. And I think that should be noted. And certainly this made me, so I was not aware that this was a thing, but I had some very critical words about Louis Farrakhan. And I realized that's a complicated relationship for Black people. On one end, often talks about empowerment and self-worth and, men being leaders in the community.
Been in the trenches
right.
and turning Black men's lives around for decades.
Totally. For decades. He has done this. I'm very well aware of this. However, it comes wrapped up in something that is a little uncomfortable for me as a woman. I mean, he's said a lot of misogynistic things. He's definitely said some anti-Semitic things. And so he's a little bit difficult for me to take. And so I had some criticisms for him. And I have never been told so many times to butter biscuits. Like, what is the butter and biscuits thing?
I didn't know that's a thing.
So they were like, go and butter Baxter's biscuits. I was like, what?
Is that like a slave reference, like a house nigga reference or something?
I guess it was. But it was always about the biscuits. And I could not understand why it was this fixation with biscuits.
We live in a world. We live in a world where right now we're having a very nuanced, complicated conversation. And we live in a world, and it's always been there, and I've seen it just being, a Black man who's mixed, having a Jewish mom. But I'm from Northern California. But, anytime you start getting into nuance, people want you to pick sides. Pick a side. Where you at? Pick a side. And sometimes there's not a side. Sometimes there is an area where, you can exist that's not about picking the most extreme stance on a particular topic, especially when you're talking about humans. You're talking about, the migration of humans over thousands of years.
And you're picking sides of groups of people.
Right.
Like pick an entire group. I'm not picking an entire group. Can I pick good people? How about, can we do this?
It's the humans, man. So, I'm glad we have you on today, and I'm glad you wrote that article. I'm also glad, and hopefully people are watching this, look, Black people, if you're looking for our origin story, routing it through white supremacy is hard, right? And it's not taught in school. But you can, if you want to go find it, it's there. It's in Africa, and you can go find it, and it's hard. It's not as easy and readily available because they want to keep, and they've wanted to keep, Black people not knowledgeable of our origin story, and it's a complicated origin story. It's not black and white, pun intended, and and even the Jewish story is complicated. Rosenberg and I talk about the Eastern European Jewish story, which is a very complicated story. It's not just like Jews ran everything and all the Jews got all the money and they made all the bank decisions. It's not that. It's not that at all. And just like there's white supremacy in every group, right? There's evil in every group also. You know what I'm saying? And that's something that people just need to become more sophisticated about. And as you pointed out earlier, Jemele, I think this moment in history of us all not having concert distractions, sports gathering distractions. We've ran out of things to watch on Netflix. If you haven't caught up on Jemele Hill's Unbothered on Spotify, you can catch up on that if you ran out of other things to tune into. It is a time for us to learn and sit down. Mother Nature sat our asses down and made us really start to pay attention, hopefully, to one another, and maybe that's the silver lining here.
And Jemele, I got to ask you, so your podcast is called Unbothered, and in my friendship with you over the last several years, I can honestly say, and I remember talking to you in the heat of Donald Trump, like when you were the number one thing talked about in the world, we were texting, and you really were unbothered. As a friend and someone who is proud of you as a colleague, I am bothered sometimes. Like watching the way people talk about you, come at you. You have that Ebro gene of really being able to just fight back and forth and not get down. But I will tell you, I do worry. I mean, like they have made you an enemy to some extent of white supremacy, which in one sense I'm incredibly proud of because it speaks to the work you're doing. But in another sense, it freaks me out a little bit. Have there been moments when it does get scary, or are you actually unbothered all the time?
Unbothered doesn't mean that I don't care. It just means that I don't care enough to allow this to infect my spirit, because that's mostly what we all have to protect is our spirit, our energy. People only have a right to certain things. I reserve my energy and my spirit for the people who truly know me. I'm not going to expend a lot of my energy and spirit on people who insist on being not just bad faith actors, but a lot of times just really awful people. So the reaction, while it was the volume of it that was a little overwhelming at times, and I'm still getting death threats, that has not changed. Still getting called out of my name and racial slurs on a weekly, if not daily basis, particularly anytime I say anything about Donald Trump. Like, I can expect the onslaught. So in that way, the criticism of Farrakhan was actually kind of refreshing, because at least I got called some new slurs.
Some new hate. Yes.
The new hate. I was like, ooh, tell me more about these biscuits. Like, y'all making me hungry.
Clay Travis's fans never mention this.
No, right, exactly. It's like, all right. Biscuits it is. So it is at sometimes it can be, more frustrating and annoying, more so than anything, because, it gets to a point where it's like you ignore, you block. And then every now and again, I just decide, you know what, I to lift my mood, let me just make an example out of somebody real quick. All right, now I'm good. Now I can go back to normal. All right, good. I bought you all the attention you wanted with your moronic statements and whatever it is you tweeted about me. And I guess maybe because I'm still in motion with a lot of things, I haven't had a lot of time to sit down and really, really think about it. But I think it was like last year, I did an event, and it was a great storytelling event for LeBron's media company, Uninterrupted, where I was the host. And the whole gist of it was that different athletes and different people in the community connected to sports were pinpointing and telling the story of something that was really monumental and that really kind of changed their lives. And the story that I told, and I hadn't done this, so I got a lot of snail mail, a lot of people actually writing into ESPN during all the controversy with Donald Trump. And you got to be real committed to racism these days to put a stamp on it and send it in. So congratulations, I guess. And I had not read any of these letters. They actually mistakenly had gone to an ESPN executive, and he gave them to me. He's like, I don't know if you want to read these, but for some reason, these wound up on my desk. Here you go. So these are dozens and dozens of letters. I kept them in a folder, in a bin, never opened them up. And then for this event, I said, you know what? I'm going to open these up, and I'm going to read them, and I'm going to read some of these. And man, this is some of the craziest, most disgusting, most racist things I've ever seen. And I was like, I'm glad I read this 2 years later, because I couldn't imagine reading this at the time and how that might have psychologically messed with me, to know there are people out there like this, and not only thought like this, but were real serious about doing me some harm. And so, I read some of those letters, and it actually wound up being quite cathartic for me. And, I feel like what I have to say and the things that I want to do outweighs the sort of collection of numbskulls that are intent on not necessarily stopping me, but just intent on being on the wrong side of history. So I guess I just don't pay attention that much to those people, only when they get on my nerves to a certain degree. But I just really kind of try to pretend they
Twitter
don't
troll
exist.
here
Like Clay
there.
Travis. Yeah, it's like Clay Travis doesn't exist to me. It's like, I don't even care. Like, he's not even relevant enough for me to care about.
Who's Clay Travis?
I hate.
And that's sincere. I
You don't
knew
want-
that you'd say
they
that.
don't
Yeah,
even
don't
know.
even worry about it.
Oh,
Yeah, that's all right.
Laura, do you know who Clay Travis is?
I've seen the trolling online, and
And,
refuse.
Barstool came for you recently as well, right?
Yeah, it's like,
Of
you know,
course.
all right, so what? It's like, you know what I'm saying? It's just like, I trust me.
Oh, so wait, so Barstool
Barstool
has embraced that they are just a white supremacist, good old boy network?
I wouldn't go that
I
far.
would say they're embracing it.
Oh.
Jemele pointed some things out. and there was anger and resistance, shockingly, to those things being pointed out. And Jemele wasn't the only one pointing it out, but she's Jemele.
Yeah, I mean, and this is not, the things that hadn't been said for years. And, I addressed some of it on my podcast because they tried to cancel me, which I thought was cute. And, I wasn't trying to cancel them. That's the thing where we are right now is that people take any criticism, any level of you trying to hold them accountable as being canceled. Like, no, we just try to point out that you are wrong. Like, right. That's do better. Like, that doesn't mean you're canceled. Like, we can't cancel anybody. All right. I mean, the president is one of the most deserving people of being canceled. We can't clearly cancel him. So obviously, this idea that people are walking around being canceled is just ridiculous. So they came for me. And, I will say this in fairness to Barstool, which sounds like a weird statement to say. I mean, my criticisms were singularly directed. I do understand why people have problems with their content. There is a lot of problematic content that they have, but there were, because I've appeared on Pardon My Take with Big Cat and PFT commentator, who I think those guys are actually really talented. And so I've had some, back when we were promoting SportsCenter, because they're one of the top podcasts in America. And it's a little bit different vein, I think, than some of the traditional things that you see on Barstool. And so, for Portnoy to start, coming after me, and I guess I've
only seen clips on Twitter. I saw a clip recently, right. So I haven't spent time with it, so I don't know enough. But I do know that it's always felt like a good old boy.
It's really
network.
Nothing to know. No, I understand why you would say that, and that reputation is deserved.
Yeah, the frat boy thing, it's never been my thing. You know what I'm saying? I just never felt like it was for me, The good old white boy, frat boy,
and that is
white boy jokes.
Even if they were to argue in support of everything they've done, I don't think that they could argue that branding is unfair. That's what they went for. That was the frat boy thing was the branding. That's it. You didn't get that wrong. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't meant for us.
So then they did good marketing. They did good marketing.
They did.
It is. Jemele Hill, Unbothered is a Spotify original. The episodes air weekly every Monday. Go look for it. It was just great to see you and chop it up with you again, man. I just love your work, and I love you to death.
Same here.
And I wish we could have you on more.
Oh, look, that's totally your decision. I'm always here for you guys. I love you all. You all are really great and always a fantastic listen. And and let me just briefly plug me and Carrie Champion. Our new show is
I watched that the other day. Yo, that shit was hot on TNT.
Yes.
So it's Jemele, it's Carrie, it was Draymond Green, and it was and Charles.
Oh no! You're thinking about I got too many jobs. You mixing them up. So we did do TNT did a special series of show called The Arena that Carrie hosted. And on leading into the NBA restarting, this is a show they want to do to focus on social justice, a lot of the off the court issues that are happening and how players are involved in their voices. So on that night, it was me, Carrie, Draymond, Charles Barkley. However, Carrie Champion and we have a new show coming out on Vice that is called Stick to Sports, actually. And so that is coming out, and that's dropping in August, and we're very excited about this. You can see the promos. They just started running on Vice this week, and as they amp up the marketing campaign, you'll be seeing more about it. But very
congratulations, working with your girl too. That's dope.
Yeah, working with my girl, because apparently I only do TV shows with really close friends.
Seriously, you have carved out quite a lane, Jemele.
Quite a lane. So who next in my friendship group? I guess I heard too many horror stories about people who were thrown together and didn't like each other in the television space. But it will be dope. I mean, you got two Black women driving the show with their opinion in prime time. So we're super excited about that. See, awesome. When that starts, we'll have to come back.
Come back for that. I love Carrie too, man. Amazing. Jemele Hill, Unbothered on Spotify. Go look for it. Once again, every Monday a new episode is up. Jemele, thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Jemele.
Thanks you, guys. Jemele. Take care.
Take care. Talk soon.
All right, we'll do.
That's dope.